247 Grid's an online costed support planning tool that supports social workers to co-produce their assessments, write an outcome-based care plan, to help them calculate budgets and review progress in packages. The 247 Grid also allows the social worker to support people who receive health and social care to self-direct and co-design their care and support with them with that agreed budget. So let's go back to the Care Act. So the Care Act gives people choice and control over the health and care that they receive. So those receiving education, health also have the right to ask for a personal budget as well. Transparency and accountability is key if you want people who use services to take ownership and responsibility of their lives. So to get more involved in the care and support and be inspired to reach their best potential, which over time could reduce their long-term reliance on social care funding. And this is where the 247 Grid is the perfect tool for social workers to achieve this. Now also, the Care Act says a person's entitled to know how their personal budget is calculated. And yet the majority of care plans do not state the cost of the current commission package. Perhaps it's a block contract, a day service, a residential care placement, some dom care visits, or part of a respite short break service. But the Care Act says that a person's personal budget must be adequate to meet need and can't be arbitrarily capped with a resource allocation. So as this serves as kind of an indicative budget to meet need, we've got to ensure that what the resource allocation, if you're using a resource allocation system, make sure that it meets need. So the 247 Grid's a perfect visual and transparent way to sit down with a person who's going to be receiving services and show them how their package has been calculated. Now, when I was told how much my son's services cost, I knew I could get better outcomes by spending the money differently. So that's what inspired me to actually take a direct payment. Now, the services commissioned for my two sons with autism and learning disabilities were not working towards our family outcomes. In fact, there were no outcomes written within the care plan for the current services that they were being delivered. So that was their 5 days of day service, their respite short breaks, and my son was being offered a residential care placement. But actually, if I hadn't have said, well, actually, no, none of that is working towards our family outcomes of them being supported here in their local community, then actually, I believe in these last 12 years, they probably would still be within that day service, still receiving the same amount of respite short break. And my son would be in a £1,700 a week residential care placement. But by taking a direct payment, co-producing a good outcomes-based care plan for both of the boys with the social worker, and being given that autonomy and trust to spend the budget to meet those outcomes and reduce my son's long-term dependence on funded support, I used the visual 247 Grid to manage that budget. And over the last 12 years, that has reduced from £42,000 a year for both of them down to just under £9,000 a year. So by simply celebrating the independent skills that they'd already gained, so my sons had come through transition, so there were things that they'd learned at special school and at college around their independent living skills, travel training, etc., etc. So there were many areas within their weekly grid. So the 247 Grid is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week visual representation of a week. And I was able to add those activities the boys could do themselves, and we coloured those blue. And then by using colour again, we looked at the areas where they needed that paid support from adult social care, and we coloured those areas red. Now that could be around their meal making, it could be around their laundry, their housekeeping, around budgeting, shopping, going out and finding activities to do in the community, etc. And perhaps when the boys first opted out of their 5 days of day service, they weren't very connected to the community. So there was a lot of red areas on my son's grid. But then we used the grid and the outcomes within the care plan, and we put the two together. And that helped me to broker or to use that direct payment to find creative solutions to turn those red areas blue. Okay, so that could be for purchasing a paid personal assistant or a micro provider to take them out into the community, to connect them to the community, get them used to going to the library, perhaps themselves, introducing them to local people. And then those local people who go to the library on the same day would start supporting their son, so they didn't need that paid support anymore. And so that red paid support area on perhaps say a Monday afternoon has now turned blue. That means the money that was funding that Monday afternoon red activity has now turned blue, so is at no cost. So that money goes back into the grid and can be used on other red areas. So we could use it perhaps to look at some digital solutions for their cooking at lunchtime. So instead of having a paid one-to-one at lunchtime, that one-to-one over a period of time took step-by-step photographs of how to make his sandwich, how to make his jacket potato, uploaded that onto a digital photo frame, which cost £55. So that the direct payment paid for that £55, paid for the one-to-one to make those resources. But after that lunchtime that was red is now blue at no cost. So that money then goes back into the grid. So basically, the grid supports a person or a family that has got a direct payment to look at how to innovatively and creatively use that direct payment to turn as many areas that are red currently on their grid blue. Now, we are seeing a lot of providers starting to use the 247 grid, especially if they're holding individual service funds. So those providers holding individual service funds are using a 247 grid to sit down with the individual and their family to say, this is the budget that we currently have. These are the areas within your week, your personal care and other activities that you can do and you're very confident at doing and you're independent at. So these are your blue areas. But these are the red areas on your grid that we're currently supporting you with. So together, how can we creatively look at other options to turn your grid blue? And then what we would be looking at, just as I did with my budget, the areas where we'd turn blue meant that we were using less of the 4-weekly budget. So I was then able to contact my direct payment team and my social worker to say, actually, we don't need as much money going forward because we are actually having these needs met in a different way. So we were in control at my son's pace to actually reduce their reliance on the direct payment, rather than what we're seeing an awful lot of is that if there is surplus within an account, perhaps an individual and a family just do not know how to broker outcomes. They haven't got many local activities or local support so that they can actually use their direct payment. And so we're finding a surplus building up in someone's direct payment account. But that doesn't help them. But the local authority just see that there's a surplus and claw it back. So the 247 grid, I think, is a really good tool to have a co-productive conversation with individuals, but empower them to self-direct, take ownership of their health and social care and their lives, their health and well-being, and to reach their best potential. I think it's around the social worker's confidence. It can be, I can appreciate they are most of the time feeling that they're firefighting and they feel that they haven't got a great deal of time. They've got so many cases on their caseload, they're not used to being transparent, the transparency that the Care Act is asking for. So to put together perhaps 5 days of day service, or a residential care placement, or a package of dom care for an older person, and for that person on that family to turn around and say, well, can you tell me how that's been calculated? What does that package actually look like? It's very, very difficult, especially if you've been using a resource allocation piece of software to actually calculate that. So it's kind of an arbitrary sum, if you like. So the 247 grid kind of gives that visual 24 hours, 7-day a week representation of a week, and enables the social worker to sit down with the person and actually, let's just say, test that RAS, test that resource allocation, that initial indicative budget, that residential care placement that's going to be costing £1,700 a week, like it did for my son. And to be able to say, well, okay, actually, for that £1,700, is there something more that you want? Is there something different that you want? And when I did that myself with the 247 grid, I designed a package for my son to live in the same community as us, found his own home for himself, got him his DWB benefits and his housing benefit, and the care package 24/7 wraparound care package for my son only cost £893. I heard a social worker tell me that actually, by using the 247 grid to ask an individual holding a direct payment, or perhaps a provider that's holding an individual service fund, or even a commission provider with a long-standing package, actually, what are you spending the current budget on? What progress are you making? Have you making more use of community assets, assistive technology? And she said that often when I ask those questions without using a 247 grid, I can come across very challenging, and people and providers get very defensive. But by using a 247 grid, it seems to take or reflect or deflect the question over to something that's less challenging and more co-productive, more of a softer approach to asking the same, could be quite challenging questions, but it's also quite energizing as well. So, for instance, not just my son's, a lady at the age of 63 who came out of residential care after being there for 45 years in residential care and 5 days of day service, took an individual service fund and has been using the 247 grid to design and use that budget in a creative, in a different way. She's given up her day services, she's got an allotment, she's going riding, she's lost weight, she's more bubbly, she's more interactive. And what I hear her say, not about using less money, but I want more blue in my grid. Now, that to me is wonderful from somebody who's been in quite institutional care for the majority of her life, to be able to have the confidence and the co-productive approach with her support provider to actually build in at the age of 63, start doing more herself, not having a sleep in the property, being able to do more activities herself so that there is less support in the home, is absolutely fantastic. Not to save money, doesn't come into this lady's life, but actually to see more blue in her grid is given her a lot more confidence and self-esteem. So I would say to local authorities and CCGs as well, that if they want to be able to offer the self-direction, the choice and control, the transparency that is in the Care Act, being able to co-produce those assessments, to be able to write some good outcome-based support plans, to be able to creatively co-design those creative solutions to reduce long-term reliance on social care, and try to move people perhaps that are on very current traditional 5 days a day service or have been in residential care for a very long time, be able to move away from that sort of commissioning to a new kind of new co-productive commissioning, then the 247 grid is the tool for you. Join the other local authorities who have benefited from having the 247 grid tool in their toolkit, as it was, that's there on a day-to-day basis for social workers, it's there for providers, it's there for people who use services that just want to be able to understand the way that their care packages have been designed and put together, and help them to be more involved. And as I said earlier, if they are more involved and they take ownership of their care and support, more than likely you will be able to support them to reduce their long-term reliance on that care and support.